It is a good year to be a Brandon Sanderson fan. 2023 was the year of Sanderson. His secret projects reached over $41 million on Kickstarter, shattering records like Ado Nalzium's death. But now that time's come and gone, it's 2024, yet the man has done it again. Yes, he announced another secret project, 631, and the leatherbound for Words of Radiance has already raised over $16 million, making Sanderson's campaign the most successful fundraiser on the platform thus far. And there's also that small release coming out later this year called the Stormlight Archive Book 5. Also, Brandon has negotiated better terms for authors publishing on Audible coming later this year. So he's made a major shift in the industry when it comes to authors publishing on Audible, which is amazing to see. What I am trying to get at is that Sanderson is a titan in modern fantasy. Now, one side to all the incredible hype surrounding Sanderson is that many people are going to be disappointed. That's kind of always the side effect when things are hyped up to insane levels. Sanderson is one of my favorite authors. I think he's great, but he does have his flaws too, and I understand he's not going to be for everyone. However, there is so much versatility in his books that I do think many people are going to find at least one book that they really enjoy by Sanderson. And there is a lot of books to choose from. Today, I want to talk about why you should read Brandon Sanderson. I'm going to go over the things that I think he does very well as talk about some of his weaknesses so that you can decide if he's an author for you. I'll even recommend where to start depending on what type of reader you are. But first, I spend a lot of time video editing, and I'm always looking for ways to level up my editing. And recently, I've been taking classes on advanced video editing with Adobe Premiere Pro by Jordy Vandeput. And it really helped me with enhancing audio, color correction, and just improving my overall workflow. And I found this class on Skillshare. I'm sure you've all heard of Skillshare. It is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry pros in a huge variety of topics, whether it's music production, video editing, writing, painting, design, crafting, productivity, you name it. Skillshare is a great way to invest in yourself and improve your skills, and if you're not sure where to start, Skillshare has designed learning paths which I find really helpful to go from novice to pro in no time. These are handpicked classes meant to be taken in order so they build upon each other. So whether you're a beginner or advanced, they have learning paths for you across a huge variety of categories. Hey, maybe like me, you want to learn to edit better. Well, there's a whole learning path called Level Up Your Video Editing with Adobe Premiere Pro that contains the class that I mentioned. I'm gonna challenge you to join me in a learning journey this year. The first 500 of you to use my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, and you can get started today. A huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. Born in December 1975, Brandon Sanderson's journey from a young boy in Lincoln, Nebraska to one of the most celebrated fantasy authors of our time is a testament to his perseverance and passion for storytelling. Despite initial rejections, Sanderson's debut novel, Elantris, in 2005 marked the beginning of a prolific career that would influence much of modern fantasy. He followed up the next year by publishing Mistborn: The Final Empire, which was met with even more success, though he still was yet to truly break out. Sanderson's breakthrough into the mainstream fantasy scene came unexpectedly. In 2007, following the death of Robert Jordan, Sanderson was chosen to complete the final volumes of The Wheel of Time, a decision made by Jordan's widow and editor, Harriet McDougall, and was based on Sanderson's expressed admiration for the series and his proven talent as a fantasy novelist. And his work with bringing The Wheel of Time to a close was definitely no small feat. He wrote 3 books and a total of almost 1 million words to bring the story a worthy conclusion, which earned the respect and admiration of Jordan's fans, but also solidified his position as a leading figure in fantasy literature. And of course, from then on, his literary career has grown more successful after every book, and he's published a lot since. Now, to say Sanderson is renowned for his unique world building and intricate hard magic systems is an understatement. I feel like even if you haven't read his work yet, you likely know that he's said to be good at these things. The worlds he creates, like the ash-covered world of Scadrial from Mistborn, or the alien, storm-ravaged planet of Roshar, in all of its odd crustacean glory, are some of the most memorable lands that I have read. And he designs these worlds with a lot of fascinating detail, from the geography and climate to the political systems and cultures. And all of these aspects really help immerse the reader. Now, I should probably mention, Sanderson doesn't just make worlds, he's created an entire universe. The Cosmere is his connected universe where many of his adult fantasy books take place. And careful readers are going to be rewarded with Easter eggs and hidden cameos, and even a cosmic story that's slowly being unveiled in the background, though all of that's optional. Like, you can still enjoy Sanderson's books without being that Cosmere aware. But for me, learning about the Cosmere is one of my favorite things about Sanderson, and I think it's a big appeal for many diving into his books. I feel like Sanderson does plotting and world building incredibly well. I mean, he's made some of the most unique, freshest takes on worlds that I've read in fantasy. They're always so much fun, and the way that his magic systems relate to the world that he's building, they mix in with the world so well. And obviously he's made some of the best hard magic systems out there. Now, that being said, I do feel like his worlds do not feel as well lived in as some other fantasy authors. I mean, there's a lot of fantasy authors that are able to develop worlds that feel like they have a vast history to them. Worlds that have existed long before the story started and continue to exist after you finish reading. Malazan, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, A Song of Ice and Fire, Tolkien's books, they all have incredible worlds that just feel like they've existed for a long time. Sanderson's worlds don't really give me that same feeling at all. I feel like he writes just enough to make the world feel believable. There's some intricate things going on, but they don't feel as well lived in as some other stories. Sometimes his worlds just feel a bit smaller, and that's because oftentimes the planet they're taking place on actually is smaller. For instance, while Roshar is one of the biggest planets in the Cosmere, it is smaller than Earth. Standalones like Yumi and the Nightmare Painter and Tress of the Emerald Sea, they all have planets that are quite a bit smaller. Even Mistborn, a planet that goes through immense changes and we see this kind of industrial revolution going on, it's still a planet that feels smaller, and that's because it is. So I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing per se, but it is something I consider a weakness, because I do like when books feel more lived in, because it just helps that suspension of disbelief. A hallmark of Sanderson's writing is his innovative approach to magic systems. Now, instead of relying on vague or mysterious magical forces, Sanderson meticulously designs systems with clear rules and limitations. Whether it's the allomancy of Mistborn, the surge binding of the Stormlight Archive, or the colorful biochromatic breath of Warbreaker, the magic in Sanderson's worlds is both awe-inspiring yet logical, which really adds this layer of believability, because you can understand how it all works and imagine yourself using that magic. And this clarity also adds tension and strategy to confrontations, because while magic does often get characters out of situations, it's never used as like, oh, magic conveniently saves the day, Deus Ex Machina style. No, it is characters finding clever ways to use the magic within the rules already set. And Sanderson doesn't break his rules. And as a reader, this can be so much fun, because we can try and problem solve with the protagonist by imagining ourselves in that position, brainstorming cool new applications to the magic because we know its limitations and uses. His magic systems feel like something that could be real because there's a science to it. Now, I've seen some loud voices in the fantasy community claiming that hard magic systems kills fantasy, and Sanderson making this a trend is the Antichrist bringing fantasy fiction to rubble. Now, I love soft magic systems as well. They're great for building a sense of mystery and awe, and it really brings that classic sense of magic to the fantasy genre. And I feel like soft magic has just as much value as hard magic, and I hope to see people still writing soft magic systems as well. But the way that Sanderson makes magic a science, something that has strict rules and limitations and consequences, just makes it feel more believable and immersive. I am a big fan of the idea of allomancers, people able to ingest and burn special metals to grant them a range of powers, from enhancing physical and sensory abilities to emotional manipulation. It's just such a cool magic system, and surge binding from the Stormlight Archive is probably my favorite. There's so many different magic systems within the Stormlight Archive, and so many uses. So what separates Sanderson from many other fantasy authors? In my opinion, a lot of that has to do with the pacing of his books. For the most part, it is really, really good. I mean, you can read the Stormlight Archive, these books that are massive, in a much quicker time than it takes to read many other fantasy novels that are half that size. And this is because his books are hard to put down and they're very accessible. Generally speaking, Sanderson gets you interested and hooked in the beginning of the book, and then he uses the second half to kind of build upon the world and the plots and the mystery. Then the ending is just this crescendo of plot that just ends in this big Sanderlanche climax that just feels epic, and this happens in a lot of his books. Sanderson's really great at ending his novels. He builds upon the plot lines and the mysteries until the very end is just incredibly exciting when you're finally getting some answers or some really badass scene is happening. So even when his books do slow down a bit in the middle, it always makes up for it with the ending. I never regret having read a Sanderson book. And now we need to talk about characters, because Sanderson has written some of my favorite characters in fantasy, but at the same time, I see a lot of criticisms for Sanderson's books are that his characters don't feel multi-dimensional. Now, to be fair, I feel like this is something that Sanderson has improved upon with time, and sometimes even some of the main leads, it takes multiple books for them to get that way, to feel more well-rounded. They have to go through events in their character arcs to give them that growth. So it's all about patience, in my opinion. But Sanderson writes characters that are struggling, and I feel like this makes them very relatable because they struggle with a lot of things that people struggle with. Whether it's feelings of regret or isolation or depression or going through one trauma or another, it makes you really feel for his characters the more you learn about them. One of Sanderson's key strengths is his ability to give emotional growth to his characters. They are shaped by everything happening to them. Characters dealing with grief and loss, PTSD, anxiety, parenthood, leadership, and shame. The struggles these characters go through in their personal journeys can be very relatable for readers who have experienced similar things. I know I can relate to some of this, and I'm sure you can too. Now, Kaladin from the Stormlight Archive is one of these characters dealing with personal trauma and depression, and the guilt of not being able to save everyone. Kaladin struggles with depression and feelings of worthlessness. I feel like is very nuanced and respectful in the way that Sanderson handles it. It really shows his skill in representing mental health issues without stigmatization. I will admit there are times where I feel like Kaladin gets too stuck in his depression and he ends up feeling a little bit one note, like the depression is defining him. But in a way, maybe that's me not understanding depression. Oftentimes, depression doesn't go away just because you have some success. It's a struggle that remains with you all your life. I still sometimes wish there wasn't so many pages reminding us that he's a sad boy. But even so, Kaladin is still one of my favorite character point of views that I enjoy the most in the Stormlight Archive. Now, Shalon Devar, she's a character that is very polarizing in the community, but the layers of self-deception and trauma that she goes through in her journey offers kind of a look into the mechanisms of coping and survival, and I found her to be really intriguing. I enjoy how Sanderson explores the complexities of the human psyche. There's very few fantasy authors that I can think of that put so much thought into handling mental health. I mean, these are issues that are often cloaked in silence in our society, so integrating these characters with identifiable mental health struggles into his books. He's not only destigmatizing these issues, but also emphasizing the importance of understanding and compassion. Occasionally, Sanderson does have some cheesy dialogue in there and some cheesy humor that kind of pulls me out of the story. Like, some of it even feels a little bit too modern, so it doesn't feel like it fits with the world. I know that's a big criticism that a lot of people have, and that's something that I agree with. Sometimes the humor just doesn't quite land. But when it does land, I feel like Sanderson can make some really great scenes. Whether it's no mating or what Adolin had to do in his shard plate, there's a lot of parts that make me laugh out loud, while there's also some scenes that just kind of make me cringe, like the anime-esque bathing scenes in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, or some of Shallan's witty lines that just don't quite land. For me, I do feel like the good that he does with his character work far outweighs the bad, but some people just, they're not gonna click with it. And hey, that's okay, we all have our own taste. I feel like Sanderson is the perfect gateway to adult fantasy, whether you're just getting back into reading again, or you're a younger reader who mostly reads young adult. And even Sanderson has admitted that he's happy to be labeled the gateway drug to fantasy. I mean, why wouldn't you be? Brando Sando is an incredibly accessible author. I mean, his writing is very easy to get into, it's easy to understand, he writes very relatable characters, and even though he has a lot of depth and complexity to his lore and the magic systems, he explains it all in just a way that's very easy to understand and follow. With his interconnected Cosmere universe, I do feel like some readers are going to feel a bit overwhelmed, and it might feel like homework to try to keep track of all the Easter eggs and mentions and all that. Thankfully, you don't need to actually keep track of all the Cosmere stuff in the background if you don't want to. You don't have to. You can completely enjoy Sanderson on his own. I do feel like, though, in certain books, you will benefit a lot. For instance, like The Lost Metal or Rhythm of War. There is some Cosmere reveals in there that just have a huge impact on you if you are Cosmere aware, but again, you don't have to be. Now, his books aren't really filled with like graphic violence and spicy, sexy scenes, and some people find that to be a weakness of Sanderson, but not every book needs that. I mean, his books have a lot of action and they do have violence in there, and maybe a bit of spicy scenes, not really too much, but he just doesn't give it that graphic description of a grimdark fantasy because that's not what he writes. So honestly, I feel like a lot of the criticisms against Sanderson being too PG is mostly coming from people that are big fans of Martin or Abercrombie, and they're expecting that same thing. Listen, as a big fan of grimdark, I don't think every book needs to be that, and you shouldn't either. That doesn't make a book good or bad. Now, with Sanderson's writing being very accessible, it appeals to a load of people, and the inverse of that is that it's not heavily prosaic. It doesn't have like long, beautiful, flowery descriptions, and I've seen a lot of people that like to trash on Sanderson's writing because of that. And I don't really understand it. I mean, there's some times where I wish there was a bit more to his writing, but overall, he's a great writer. That's why he's had so much success. I feel like I'd rather enjoy writing that focuses more on what's happening than on beautiful descriptions, though I do like beautiful descriptions as well. George R.R. Martin's long food descriptions make me hungry, and I love them, but they also go on for a lot of pages. They just keep on going, and so does my hunger. Sanderson is much more to the point, but his magic systems and his world building is much more complex than other authors. I mean, he kind of needs to get right to the point, or else we're gonna get lost in the Cosmere lore and how everything works. And while I would say that his prose is a bit more simple, I don't consider that to be a weakness. In fact, Sanderson writes some really hard-hitting scenes. Sanderson's emotional scenes always get me in a way that other authors don't. They just go straight to my heart, and he's also really great at writing epic scenes that give you goosebumps and make you want to fist bump the air and jump out of your seat just because of how epic and badass the scene is. And he's one of the very, very few authors that gives me that feeling when reading. Honor may be dead, but Sanderson will do. I think he's really good at giving us little clues and breadcrumbs leading up to big reveals, especially in the third act when everything comes together. In my opinion, Sanderson's prose is fine. It doesn't stand out that much, but he does write some really beautiful quotable lines here and there. But I much prefer simpler prose with strong storytelling and structuring over flowery prose and weak storytelling any day. And honestly, I need to rant here because I think most people that complain about his prose don't actually even understand what prose is. Prose is not the poeticness of writing. Prose is like the simple language. It's just ordinary language without poetic rhythm. So I mean, really, Sanderson writes great prose. It's not needlessly complicated, and the way that he uses voice for each of his characters means that they stand out. They're very distinct, and I can tell who's speaking before I see their name. A lot of people equate flowery and description-heavy prose as good prose, which is not true. I mean, Joe Abercrombie, for example, is often praised for having good prose, but he is pretty much the opposite of flowery. Anyways, rant out of the way, I do feel like there are aspects of Sanderson's prose that do deserve some critique. I mean, the way that he sometimes just lays information out there without subtly slipping it in feels unnatural. Sometimes there is repetition in the formulaic feeling of his books, the structuring of them, or his repetitive wording and sentence structure at times, but it never really occurred to me that Sanderson's writing is overly simple until the internet. I feel like once authors or actors or anybody falls into the mainstream, then people are just, they get the free pass to give them hate and complain about things about them because they're overhyped. And I don't know, I think it's silly. Now, Sanderson is one of the most reliable authors that I've come across. I mean, we know that he loves the art of writing itself. We can't seem to stop Sanderson from writing. He's the type of guy who goes on a vacation and accidentally writes another book. Does this man even sleep? I don't know. He is constantly writing new works and publishing new books, and I think this is a major appeal to him as an author, especially for readers that are kind of burned by authors like Martin and Rothfuss. And just the fact that Sanderson can write these big epic fantasies so quickly but still maintain a level of consistent quality to them is just something you don't really see that often at all. He even keeps everyone up to date on the progress of his book. He has a progress bar on his website, and he's posting weekly updates on YouTube, which is the perfect modern author thing to do. And there's many authors like Martin or Rothfuss that have been rude to their fans in the past for simply asking about the progress of their unreleased book that's been unreleased for over a decade. And Sanderson has never been rude to his fans. I mean, he genuinely seems happy to have them and grateful, and that's just something that makes me feel I have a lot of respect for Sanderson and the way that he handles his fans and keeping them up to date and valuing them. Not only this, but he's also invested a lot in writers as well. He's taught college courses on writing and world building, which he publishes on YouTube for free.
I had written 13 novels without selling any of them. If I had looked at those early books of mine that had not turned out very well and said, I'm just a terrible writer, my product of my writing time were these terrible books, I should give up, I would not be here.
He's also just really active in his fan base, replying to fans on Reddit and YouTube and live streams, and also going to cons, and he's a little bit of a showman as well. I mean, he makes his announcements really fun. For example, look at his secret projects announcement. Sanderson knows how to make it fun for his audience. He's consistent, he has good communication, and he has an amazing team that's working with him to help him get merchandise out for his books, and all of this is why Sanderson is so well loved and has a dedicated fan base, and there's so much hype around him. Okay, I need to address the massive chasm fiend in the room, and that is the hype. Sanderson, I mean, he's a juggernaut in modern fantasy right now, so yes, he is very, very hyped. And like I said at the beginning of the video, that means a lot of people are going to be disappointed. I have never read a book that everyone is going to like. That just doesn't happen. So really, the fact that some people don't like Sanderson, they're tired of seeing him be recommended, isn't going to stop me from recommending him. Because believe it or not, there's still a lot of people that don't even know about Sanderson's books. There's some people that are not extremely connected in the BookTube universe. BookTube universe, did I just create a multiverse? The BookTube sphere. There's a lot of fantasy readers out there who haven't read everything, and believe it or not everyone just reads modern fantasy. There's tons of classics out there that people are still enjoying, and maybe they just haven't explored modern fantasy yet, and they haven't tried Sanderson. So I think there's always value in recommending a series or an author, because there's someone out there that hasn't read them yet. But I think ultimately it comes down to what you enjoy as a reader. It comes down to your taste and what's more more important for you. If you enjoy these unique fantasy worlds with cool magic systems, and also some really great character arcs with characters struggling with trauma and mental illness and stuff like that, then you might enjoy this more than some others will. If you are the type of reader that very much values like high quality prose that you can just take your time and feel immersed in just the writing itself, then Sanderson might not be for you. He does have more simpler prose. However, that being said, I'm someone who I love The Name of the Wind. I love Ursula K. Le Guin's The Earthsea Cycle. I love the beauty of the writing. Guy Gavriel Kay is one of my favorite authors. He writes some incredibly just high-end prose. Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun has written some of the most weird and thought-provoking content that I have read, and it's something that you just really need to take your time and think about. And I love all those books. I love those authors. I also love Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake, and that is like very, dense. And sometimes it's a slog to get through, but it's also very beautiful. But at the same time, I love Brandon Sanderson as well. I feel like I'm able to separate the things that I like with each author. And Brandon Sanderson is definitely much more simpler prose. It's very accessible, easy to get into, yet he still explores a lot of philosophical depth when it comes to the themes and the character arcs in his books. So it kind of comes down to if you can enjoy different authors' styles, or if you just like this type of story and not this type of story. I have seen so many criticisms drastically over-exaggerating the flaws of Sanderson and the simple prose, and not taking into consideration all the positives, all the things that I think he does really well. And on the opposite side, there's those diehard Sanderson fans that refuse to read anything else other than the Cosmere because they think it's the best thing ever. I don't know, I just think it's best to give everything a fair chance, and if you don't like it, you don't like it, but let people enjoy what they enjoy. Critical thinking and criticism is all good, especially when it comes to like reviewing books and literature, but you also don't need to drastically over-exaggerate the flaws of authors that you don't enjoy. You could find a balance where it's not pure hate and it's not pure worship. So you may be wondering, where's the best place to start with Brandon Sanderson? Now, the original Mistborn trilogy is the one that I see recommended the most, and that's where I started, and I think it's a great place to start. It's a great representation of the things that Sanderson does well. It has some really interesting world building and one of the best hard magic systems that I've read. Not to mention, it's just very well paced for the most part. It has some great action scenes. There's also a lot of mystery that's done very well. Now, the original Mistborn trilogy, as well as Mistborn Era 2, have the advantage of being finished, while the Stormlight Archive is still being written. So I do feel like if you want a finished trilogy, then start with the original Mistborn books. However, things to keep in mind is that while I do really enjoy the characters in Mistborn, they're not Sanderson's most well-developed characters, not all of them anyway. There is definitely times in the original trilogy where I just wanted more from the characters. Also, at times the books can feel a little bit young adult, especially in terms of how the romance is handled. If you are looking for Sanderson's best of the best, the Stormlight Archive is shaping up to be his magnum opus. This is planned to be 10 books in total by the time it's done, which is insane because these books are massive. The world is much larger than in Mistborn, with multiple characters and events happening in parallel, similar to A Song of Ice and Fire. I have heard people who have started with the Stormlight Archive and really enjoyed starting Sanderson there. However, it is a big commitment and it's still being written. And also you can benefit from reading some of Sanderson's other books before reading Stormlight so that you can pick up on all the Easter eggs and little interconnected details. I made a full video on the best reading order for understanding Sanderson's Easter eggs, so you can watch that if you're interested. If you just want to get a taste of Sanderson's writing style before jumping into one of his series, then I'd recommend starting with one of his standalone books. Warbreaker is a great place to start. I do think it's a little bit slow at times, but it's still a fantastic book. Tress of the Emerald Sea, I think is one of the most whimsical, fun adventures that Sanderson's written. It's basically the Cosmere's version of The Princess Bride. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, you probably will. But I'm gonna highly recommend The Emperor's Soul. This is something special. This is one of the best novellas I've read, and in my opinion, one of Sanderson's best works ever. It is subtly connected to Elantris and that world, but you don't need to read Elantris before reading The Emperor's Soul. The versatility of this author means there's something for everyone, whether you want the mystery of Elantris or you're looking for a sci-fi thriller young adult like Skyward. He really caters to a diverse audience, and I feel like there's going to be a Sanderson book that you'll likely enjoy. And that is why you should read Brandon Sanderson. I talked about some of his strengths and some of his weaknesses. He's clearly not going to be an author for everyone. No author is. But I do feel like there's a lot of value in his books, and I feel like the majority of fantasy readers are going to find something to enjoy. If you don't like Brandon Sanderson though, let me know in the comments why he's not an author for you. Or if you love Sanderson, let me know your favorite Sanderson books in the comments. I'd love to discuss with you guys. Anyways, a huge thank you to all my patrons that make these videos possible. I appreciate the support so much, and I'll see you soon.